Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'm going to be covering the weather for May 25th, 2023. What we're currently looking at for today is two slight risks for Texas Panhandle, as well as a slight risk for the deep southwestern Texas area, as well as a pretty large marginal threat extending from northern Colorado all the way down into Mexico. Pretty much the same area as we saw yesterday, but then we have a marginal threat for eastern Montana. Our threats primarily include the possibility for tornadoes in the deep southern slight risk area as a very small 2%, as well as a 15% wind threat for the slight risk areas, as well as a 5% for both marginal threat areas, as well as a 5% for both marginal threat areas and a 15% hail threat for both slight risk areas. Taking a look at our pivotal weather models here, starting off with our mid-level flow, you can see some pretty weak mid-level flow to begin with wind speeds in the 20 to 30 knots in the subtropical jet that is making its way out of the Pacific Ocean to trigger severe weather for the New Mexico and Texas area. But then by tomorrow, you can see a pretty decently strong mid-level jet make its way out of the same area with wind flow in the 40 and 50 knots to potentially increase any severe weather potential for tomorrow. But for today, we have that we only have the 30 and 20 knots. But then for the Montana risk, you can see some pretty much the exact same thing with this deep trough here making its way north to bring some 20 and 30 knots mid-level flow to trigger severe weather development for the Montana area. Taking a look at our dew points here, starting off with the Texas Panhandle, you can see that there is some decently strong moisture to begin with dew points in the 50s and 60s in some areas, which is going to be a strong fueling factor for severe weather development, as well as in eastern Montana. You can see as rounds of storm systems have passed through the area, there are strong dew points in the upper 50s into the 60s for the Montana area, which is going to allow for some strong severe weather development, as well as strong instability as well. Taking a look at the instability for the Texas area, we can see that starting off there isn't a whole lot of instability, but then continuing forward with the instability increase from surface heating, you can see that there is more moderate instability for the area, as well as maybe a little bit of higher instability for the northern slight risk area. This is going to allow for the possibility of some large hail to develop, but then down at the tornado threat area, there isn't a whole lot of instability. It's still more in the moderates, but it is definitely going to be sufficient enough with what wind shear we have down there. But then continuing forward, you can see the storm line continuing. Wind shear continues to develop across the area. Cape would have already decreased significantly across much of the area for the Texas Panhandle, making tornadic possibilities outside of that 2% area very unlikely. And then taking a look at the Cape values for the Montana marginal threat, you can see to begin with there isn't a whole lot of instability, but then continuing right before storms develop here, you can see the storm line, the outflow right here. You can see that ahead of it there is some instability that is going to stay mostly in the lower moderates, in the 1000s, likely not getting up to the 2000s in some areas, but then you can see continuing, it just goes away as storms move through the area. This is likely going to allow for the possibility of some large hail to develop throughout the eastern Montana area. Then taking a look at the wind shear here, you can see around the 2% area to begin with where they had the sufficient Cape. There is some wind shear that is going to be sufficient enough for some weak tornadic development to be possible, but then continuing forward, as storm development and Cape decreases, wind shear is sufficient enough for much of the Texas Panhandle area, but without the sufficient Cape tornadic possibilities in the Texas Panhandle is going to be very unlikely. Then taking a look at our surface instability here, you can see that for the 2% area, the 2% tornado threat, you can see that sufficient surface instability does move through the area to help allow for strong updrafts and tornadic development with the wind shear in moderate Cape. But then further up towards the Texas Panhandle area, you can see that there is sufficient enough surface instability as well as the sufficient wind shear. However, without the sufficient Cape, it is going to be unlikely again for tornadic development through the Texas Panhandle, but it is definitely going to allow for the possibility of some medium hail to large hail, as well as some damaging winds. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down in the description and check out the show souls for Project Gladiator, as well as join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator, and hopefully I will see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.